Emily Carter sat on the edge of the bed, one hand resting on her swollen belly, the other holding her phone as she waited for a text that never came. 8 months pregnant, she still tried to convince herself that Adrian was simply busy, that his million-dollar projects and endless meetings justified his absence. She replayed memories of their early years, late-night drives, spontaneous flowers, warm laughter echoing through their home, and wondered when all of it began to fade. Lately, everything felt colder. Adrian no longer accompanied her to doctor appointments, always sending a short message that he was caught up in something important. She would sit alone in the clinic waiting room, surrounded by couples excitedly pointing at sonograms, while she clasped her hands together and pretended the empty seat beside her didn't hurt. At home, the change was impossible to ignore. His calls grew shorter, his tone sharper, and even simple questions like "What time will you be home?" seemed to irritate him. Emily tried to make excuses, maybe he was stressed, maybe he needed space, but deep down, something heavy pressed against her chest. She felt him slipping away inch by inch, like sand falling between trembling fingers. Still, she held on, hoping that love was strong enough to pull him back. Some nights, she stayed awake listening to his footsteps coming home late, smelling perfume that didn't belong to her. But instead of confronting him, she placed her hand over her belly and whispered to her unborn child, promising that everything would be okay. Emily clung to hope not because she was naive, but because she was terrified of the truth. She believed that if she loved hard enough, maybe Adrian would remember who he used to be, her partner, her protector, the man who once looked at her like she was his entire world. Adrian's life began orbiting around places Emily had never even heard of: private rooftop parties, exclusive yacht gatherings, charity galas filled with glittering dresses and shallow conversations. He left home dressed in expensive suits, smelling of colognes she didn't recognize, returning long after midnight as if the house they shared was nothing more than a temporary stop. Emily started noticing painful signs: credit card statements stuffed with charges from expensive restaurants, elite lounges, and jewelry boutiques she had never visited. Every unexplained purchase felt like a quiet confession he never spoke aloud. When he walked through the door, she would smell a bold floral perfume clinging to his shirt, a scent far too unfamiliar, far too intentional. She wanted answers, but every attempt ended in his irritation. "Don't start," he would say, brushing past her as if she were a burden instead of his wife. Their once loving marriage dissolved into cold, suffocating silence. The dining table where they once laughed now sat untouched. Emily felt herself shrinking, trying not to trigger his anger, trying not to break under the weight of doubt. She wondered if she was losing him to the world of wealth he worshipped, or to someone hidden behind those receipts and late-night outings. Still, she convinced herself that once the baby arrived, he might return to her, to the family they had dreamed of. But deep inside, her heart knew the luxury he chased was becoming the wall between them, brick by painful brick. Vanessa Reed had a face that could charm a room and a mind sharp enough to cut through anyone standing in her way. The moment she realized Adrian Blake was wealthy, influential, and emotionally unsteady, she knew exactly how to mold him. She played her role perfectly, laughing at every joke, praising every decision, touching his arm at just the right moments. And each time Emily's name appeared on his phone, Vanessa would smirk and shake her head. "She doesn't understand you," she'd whisper. "She holds you back. You deserve someone exciting, someone like me." Her words weren't affectionate, they were calculated. She fed Adrian's ego, telling him he was too powerful, too successful, too brilliant to be tied to a needy pregnant wife. She made sure he felt like a king whenever he was with her, rewarding him with flirtation, admiration, and just enough affection to keep him addicted. Soon, she pushed him into spending more: luxury bags, designer clothes, 5-star trips. Every gift made Adrian feel desired, alive, important. Vanessa knew exactly which strings to pull. She encouraged him to post photos from their outings, subtly tagging herself, making their relationship harder to hide. Adrian didn't notice how she was isolating him from his own home, his own responsibilities. Under Vanessa's influence, every call from Emily felt like an annoyance, every message a chore. Vanessa made sure his heart drifted, turning him against the woman who carried his child. In reality, Vanessa wasn't in love with Adrian at all, she was in love with the lifestyle he provided. And Adrian, blinded by attention and manipulation, kept falling deeper into the trap she wove around him, a trap that would cost Emily more pain than she ever imagined. Emily had been feeling the strain for weeks, but she kept pushing herself, convincing her heart that everything was fine, that the stress would fade if she just stayed strong. But on that morning, while standing in the clinic hallway after a routine checkup, a sudden wave of dizziness washed over her. Her vision blurred, her knees buckled, and the world tilted before she could even call for help. She crumpled to the floor, clutching her belly as panic flickered through her fading consciousness. Patients nearby gasped, and nurses rushed toward her, but it was Mrs. Turner, her elderly neighbor who happened to be at the clinic for her own appointment, who reached her first. "Emily. Sweetheart, can you hear me?" Mrs. Turner cried, supporting her trembling body. Emily tried to respond, but her lips barely moved. The stress, the sleepless nights, the emotional weight, everything had finally taken a toll. Mrs. Turner immediately called for assistance, her voice shaking as she helped lift Emily onto a wheelchair. As they rushed toward the emergency department, Emily weakly whispered, "Call Adrian." Mrs. Turner dialed his number with shaking hands, but each call went straight to voicemail. She tried again. And again. Still nothing. Adrian's phone was off, unreachable, leaving Emily alone at the very moment she needed him most. Mrs. Turner squeezed her hand gently, whispering, "Don't worry, dear. I'm right here." And as Emily's consciousness faded in and out, she realized the painful truth: the only person who rushed to her side wasn't her husband. When Emily arrived at the main hospital, chaos swallowed her immediately. Nurses darted down hallways with charts clutched to their chests, phones rang without pause, and waiting rooms overflowed with anxious patients. The hospital was drowning under the weight of emergencies, shortages, and an unexpected surge of admissions. Emily, barely able to keep her eyes open, was wheeled from one crowded corridor to another as staff tried desperately to find her a spot. Every room they checked was full, beds occupied, stretchers lined up, even chairs taken by those too sick to stand. Her contractions began early, sharp and unpredictable, sending waves of fear through her chest. She tried to steady her breathing, but the exhaustion was overwhelming. Mrs. Turner stayed by her side, speaking softly, reminding her that she wasn't alone. After nearly half an hour of frantic searching, a nurse finally sighed and said, "We don't have any private rooms left, we barely have beds." Emily felt her heart sink. She wasn't asking for luxury, only a safe place to lie down. But even that seemed impossible. Eventually, she was wheeled into a cramped ward where beds were placed so close together that there was barely room to walk. And even there, all the beds were occupied, except one, a narrow mattress already half occupied by a frail, shivering woman who looked barely alive. "This is Grace," the nurse said apologetically. "She came in this morning. She's homeless, and very weak. I'm sorry, but you'll have to share temporarily." Emily lowered herself slowly onto the small space left on the mattress, trembling with pain and fear. Grace Miller, thin and pale, lifted her tired eyes and whispered, "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to take your place." Emily forced a gentle smile, wiping her tears. "It's okay, we'll manage." And so, the millionaire's wife, exhausted, contracting, vulnerable, found herself sharing a hospital bed with a homeless stranger, while her own husband remained unreachable. Grace Miller lay still, afraid even to breathe too loudly. Her clothes were worn, her cheeks hollow, her hands trembling from weakness and cold. She kept glancing at Emily's swollen belly with a mixture of guilt and concern. "You should be the one lying down properly," she whispered. "You're the one having a baby. I'm nobody." Emily shook her head gently. "Don't say that. You're someone. You matter." Grace's eyes glistened, as if those words were the first kindness she'd heard in years. Slowly, she opened up, her voice fragile. She revealed that she once had a life, once had a husband, a home, a job. She had been a secretary, married to a man she thought loved her. but her world collapsed when addiction consumed him and the abuse began. She ran for her life, ending up on the streets with nowhere to go. Malnutrition, stress, and loneliness had been her only companions since. Emily listened, tears slipping silently down her cheeks. Her own struggles felt heavy, but listening to Grace reminded her of something she had forgotten: pain is universal, and suffering doesn't discriminate. Grace apologized repeatedly for taking half the bed, for existing, for breathing too close. But Emily took her hand and squeezed it gently. "You're not a burden. You helped me just by being here." Grace smiled weakly, her eyes softening with gratitude. "I haven't been spoken to kindly in years. Thank you for seeing me." Two women from entirely different worlds, one wealthy, one homeless, found comfort in each other's presence. They shared whispered fears, quiet tears, and fragile strength. In that crowded ward, on that narrow bed, pain stitched their hearts together. Emily realized that the only warmth she felt that night didn't come from her husband, but from a stranger who understood what suffering truly meant. While Emily struggled on a shared bed surrounded by noise, chaos, and strangers, Adrian Blake was across the hospital in a world that felt like a different universe. Vanessa Reed lay dramatically on a plush hospital bed on the top floor, the private VIP wing Adrian had booked entirely for her. She had pretended to feel dizzy earlier, placing a hand on her forehead and sighing theatrically, insisting she needed urgent medical care. Adrian didn't hesitate. He demanded the best room, the best service, and unlimited attention for her. Vanessa lounged comfortably, scrolling on her phone, snapping selfies with a pout and perfectly angled lighting. She complained to Adrian that the room felt a little plain and asked for scented candles, imported fruit, silk blankets, and even a personal masseuse. "Baby, this place needs to match my vibe," she said, rolling her eyes. Adrian, eager to please, rushed to fulfill every demand. Doctors and nurses checked on Vanessa constantly, though nothing was actually wrong with her. Her tests were normal, her vitals stable. She simply enjoyed the luxury, the attention, the spectacle of being treated like royalty. And Adrian made sure of it, paying extra to keep the entire floor empty so no one else would disturb her peace. Not once did he think of Emily. Not once did he wonder why she hadn't called again. His phone sat on silent in his pocket while he fed grapes to Vanessa and laughed at her dramatic complaints. In the same building, his pregnant wife shared a cramped mattress with a homeless woman, while the man who vowed to protect her spoiled another woman with a floor full of luxury. Nurse Olivia Hart had worked in the maternity ward long enough to recognize the surnames of the city's wealthiest families. When she glanced at the chart clipped at the foot of Emily's shared bed, her eyes immediately froze at the name, Emily Carter Blake. She looked again. Could it really be the wife of Adrian Blake, the millionaire who had just reserved an entire private wing upstairs? Olivia's heart tightened. She had seen Vanessa Reed arrive earlier, draped in designer clothes, carried in by drama rather than illness, demanding luxury like royalty. And now, down here in the crowded ward, the real Mrs. Blake lay trembling on a thin mattress, barely able to breathe from stress and early contractions. Olivia approached quietly, her voice careful, gentle. "Emily, do you need anything?" Emily forced a weak smile. "I'm fine. Just tired." But Olivia saw the bruised emotions behind her eyes. She saw the swelling ankles, the stress lines, the shaky breaths. She knew what abandonment looked like. She had watched too many women suffer silently while their wealthy husbands cared more about appearances than loyalty. Breaking protocol, Olivia brought Emily an extra pillow, warm blankets, and a small privacy curtain. She offered her water, checked on her more often than required, and even stayed past her shift. She never mentioned what she knew about Adrian or Vanessa, but her kindness spoke the truth in silence. Emily whispered at one point, "Thank you, you're the only one who's looked at me like I matter." Olivia touched her hand gently. "You do matter. More than you know." And in that moment, a quiet protection formed, one woman deciding she wouldn't let another be crushed by betrayal. The lights in the ward flickered softly, casting long shadows across the room as Emily tried to control her breathing. Each contraction tightened her body like a fist, but it was nothing compared to the weight crushing her heart. She turned her face toward the wall, hiding the tears that kept spilling despite her efforts to stay strong. Grace lay beside her, half asleep, her body thin and fragile. Emily didn't want her to hear her crying. Grace had already suffered enough. So Emily pressed her fist to her mouth and let the sobs tremble silently through her body. How had her life come to this? She had given Adrian everything: love, loyalty, obedience, trust. She had believed in their golden marriage, believed his promises, believed she was cherished. And yet here she was, abandoned in a crowded ward, while upstairs Vanessa lounged in luxury, posting pictures to social media with captions that mocked the life Emily was fighting to hold together. She remembered the nights Adrian used to rub her belly, whispering how excited he was to meet their baby. Now he didn't even answer her calls. He didn't ask about her health. He didn't care that the contractions were coming too soon. Another tear escaped, sliding down her cheek onto the thin pillow. She wished she could disappear, just fade into the dim lights and empty noise around her. She wondered if she had done something wrong, if she wasn't beautiful enough or interesting enough to keep his love. But then she heard Grace whisper weakly, "Emily, are you okay?" Emily hurriedly wiped her tears. "Yes. I'm okay. Just a little overwhelmed." She forced a smile she didn't feel. Because even in her darkest moment, she refused to let her pain become someone else's burden. Upstairs, Vanessa Reed lounged like a queen on her oversized hospital bed, the suite decorated more like a five-star hotel than a medical room. She tossed her hair dramatically as a nurse adjusted her pillows. "This lighting is terrible," she snapped. "How am I supposed to go live looking like this? Fix it." Adrian stood nearby, tense and exhausted from running around to please her. "I'll talk to the staff," he muttered, already heading toward the door. Vanessa wasn't done. "I want scented candles, lavender only. And the silk blankets from the car. Also, get me those imported strawberries from the mall. Not the cheap ones. The good ones." She raised her phone, snapping selfies with exaggerated pouts, making sure her diamond bracelet sparkled. Within minutes, she posted them online with captions like, "Being treated like royalty, because I deserve nothing less." Kiss mark sparkles. Downstairs, Emily's name wasn't mentioned once. Vanessa, satisfied with her curated drama, looked at Adrian again. "Why are you still standing? Go!" He obeyed instantly. In her world, attention was currency, and Adrian was already bankrupt without realizing it. The pain struck Emily harder than before, a deep, wrenching wave that tore through her body. She gasped, gripping the bedrail with trembling fingers. "Something's happening," she whispered, her voice tight with fear. Grace, though weak, immediately pushed the call button and yelled, "She's in labor. Somebody help her." The ward erupted into hurried footsteps. A midwife rushed over, checking Emily quickly. "She's crowning. We don't have time to move her." "Stay calm, sweetheart. Breathe." Emily shook uncontrollably as the contractions came back to back. Sweat soaked her hairline. She looked around, no husband, no family, no one she loved. Just strangers and a homeless woman who had become her unexpected guardian. Grace squeezed her hand with surprising strength. "I'm here, Emily. You're not alone." The midwife guided her, voice steady despite the chaos around them. "Push with the next contraction. You're strong. You can do this." Emily cried out, the pain ripping through her chest. She pushed, tears mixing with sweat, heart splintering at the thought that Adrian should have been here, holding her hand, whispering encouragement, witnessing their child's first breath. But he wasn't. Another push. Another scream. The room blurred. The air thickened. Then, a sharp cry filled the ward. Emily collapsed back, sobbing as the midwife lifted her newborn into her arms, still covered in warmth and new life. "A healthy baby," the midwife said softly. Emily held her child close, crying into the tiny blanket. "I've got you. I've got you. Mommy's here. No luxury suite. No $1 million husband. just a mother and her child, born not into comfort, but into courage. Hours later, after an afternoon spent catering to Vanessa's endless demands, Adrian finally checked his phone. Dozens of missed calls and messages from the hospital flashed on the screen. He frowned, not with worry, but with irritation. "What now?" he muttered as he walked briskly toward the general ward, expecting inconvenience rather than crisis. When he entered the crowded room, he hesitated, scanning the beds until he spotted her, Emily. She lay pale and exhausted, her hair damp with sweat, her body slumped in fatigue. In her arms was their newborn son, tiny and fragile, wrapped in a thin hospital blanket. Emily looked up slowly, trying to smile despite the pain rising in her chest. "Adrian, he's here," she whispered. "Our baby." Adrian stepped closer, but his expression didn't soften. He stared at the child like he was a stranger, like he hadn't missed the moment that should have changed his life forever. Emily shifted the baby slightly, hoping he would at least reach out, touch his son, acknowledge the miracle in front of him. But Adrian shoved his hands into his pockets, jaw clenched. "Why didn't you call the private floor staff?" he asked sharply. "Why are you here, of all places?" Emily's smile faded. She held the baby tighter. In that moment, she realized Adrian wasn't here because he cared. He was here because he didn't want to deal with the consequences of being caught ignoring his wife. Instead of relief or concern, Adrian's face twisted with anger. He looked around the crowded ward, disgust clear in his eyes, the peeling paint, the shared beds, the visible suffering of the patients. "You embarrass me, Emily," he snapped, his voice rising enough that nearby patients turned their heads. "Why didn't you book a private room? You know how this looks." Emily blinked in disbelief. "Adrian, the hospital was full. They didn't have any rooms. I didn't have a choice." He scoffed loudly. "There's always a choice. You should have insisted. Or called someone who could handle it. But no, of course you end up here." Her lips trembled. "I tried. I called you." He rolled his eyes. "I was busy, Emily. You know I have responsibilities." Emily lowered her gaze, tears threatening again. She wasn't just dealing with postpartum pain, she was absorbing the cruelty of the man she had built her life around. Adrian stepped closer, his voice lowering but no less sharp. "You made me look careless. You should have managed this better." Emily looked at her newborn, his tiny chest rising softly against hers. This child deserved love, kindness, protection. And at that moment, she wasn't sure if Adrian could provide any of that. His reaction wasn't just cruel, it was a clear sign of the man he had become. Before Emily could respond, Grace slowly pushed herself up, wincing as she steadied her weak body. Her voice was raspy yet firm. "Enough." Adrian turned sharply. "Excuse me?" Grace took a shaky step forward, her hospital gown hanging loosely on her frail frame. "You heard me." "Enough." The ward grew quiet. Even the nurses paused to listen. "You come in here," Grace began, pointing a trembling finger at him, "acting like you're the one suffering. Like you're the one who just brought life into this world. But it's Emily, your wife, who nearly collapsed from stress. Emily who cried silently all night. Emily who held on to hope that her husband would walk through those doors." Adrian's jaw tightened. "This doesn't concern you." "Oh, it concerns everyone here," Grace fired back. "Because we all watched her fight to stay strong. We watched her break down when she thought no one was looking. We watched her give birth with strangers holding her hand because her husband was too busy." A few women nodded. Someone muttered, "Shame on him." Grace continued, voice trembling but fierce. "You don't get to scold her. You don't get to humiliate her. You abandoned her, and your child. And now you dare blame her for surviving without you?" Adrian's face flushed red, partly from anger, partly from embarrassment as the entire ward stared at him. He spat, "You know nothing," then turned on his heel and stormed out, the echo of his footsteps drowned by whispers of judgment. Emily watched him go, her heart a mix of pain and relief. for the first time, someone had spoken for her. And it wasn't her husband. After Adrian stormed out, the ward slowly settled. Emily rocked her newborn gently, trying to soothe both him and her own cracking heart. Nurse Olivia approached again, her face unusually tense. "Emily," she said softly, pulling the curtains slightly for privacy. "There's something you deserve to know." Emily looked up, eyes swollen from tears. "What is it?" Olivia hesitated, bound by professional rules, yet unable to stay silent any longer. "You kept asking for a private room earlier. You weren't denied because the hospital was full." Emily's brows tightened. "Then why?" Olivia took a deep breath. "Because Adrian did book a private floor today." Emily's lips parted in confusion. "Then why wasn't I moved there?" Olivia's eyes filled with compassion. "Because the entire floor was reserved, not for you." Her voice softened. "It was reserved for Vanessa Reed." Emily froze. The words sliced like a blade. For Vanessa. Not her. Not their newborn son. Not the woman risking her life in childbirth. She felt her breath hitch, the world tilting as pieces of truth fell into place: Adrian's absence, Vanessa's smug selfies, the luxurious suite upstairs. Olivia touched her shoulder gently. "I'm so sorry. I shouldn't tell you this, but you needed to know the truth. You deserved honesty." Emily's tears finally fell, raw, uncontrollable, devastating. She clutched baby Noah closer, afraid she might shatter without the tiny warmth grounding her. In that moment, she understood the full extent of Adrian's betrayal. He didn't just neglect her. He replaced her. And he did it on the very day she brought their child into the world. Emily sat on the edge of the hospital bed, cradling baby Noah against her chest. Her body still ached from childbirth, her arms and legs trembling with fatigue, but a fire had begun to burn inside her, a determination to reclaim her life. Nurse Olivia quietly handed her the discharge papers, her eyes filled with empathy. "You've endured more than most people could imagine," she whispered. "Take your time. Don't let anyone diminish your strength." Grace offered her hand, steady despite her frail frame. "Come on, Emily. Let's get you both out of here. You've earned peace, and this place has nothing left for you." Emily took a deep breath, summoning the courage she had kept hidden beneath weeks of betrayal, stress, and heartbreak. Each signature on the discharge forms felt like a small victory, a reclaiming of agency she hadn't realized she'd lost. With Noah swaddled safely, she stood with Grace and Olivia supporting her, stepping into the corridor filled with the ordinary chaos of the hospital, yet for her, it felt like walking into freedom. Outside, the fresh air hit her face, and she felt a strange calm settle over her. The weight of Adrian's abandonment, Vanessa's indulgence, and the cruel contrast between their worlds no longer held her hostage. She could see clearly now. She didn't need luxury, wealth, or validation from a man who chose another over her. She needed love, strength, and the chance to give her child the life he deserved. Emily glanced at Grace, who nodded reassuringly. Together, they walked away from the hospital, leaving the noise, the betrayal, and the gilded illusions behind. Emily had chosen herself, her baby, and her dignity. She would no longer be anyone's afterthought. Freedom, she realized, felt like sunlight on her skin, and she was finally stepping into it. By the next morning, the world had already begun to catch up with Adrian Blake. Photographs of Vanessa's extravagant hospital suite surfaced online, shared by anonymous staff and hospital insiders. The images spread quickly across social media, depicting a private floor decked with silk blankets, imported fruits, and personal attendants. The public reaction was swift and unforgiving. Comments ranged from outrage to ridicule. How can he leave his pregnant wife in a shared bed while she lives like a queen upstairs? And this is beyond cruel. Disgraceful. Investors began calling, questioning his judgment and morality. Some canceled meetings, others froze funding. Clients who had once sought Adrian's business ventures hesitated, unwilling to associate with someone whose private decisions had become public scandal. Even within his inner circle, whispers of disapproval spread, partners questioning how a man could prioritize indulgence over family. Vanessa, once a pillar of his indulgence, grew distant as attention shifted from her to the scandal itself. Adrian attempted damage control, but the more he tried, the more the story highlighted his failings. The empire he had spent years building suddenly felt unstable. His reputation was crumbling quietly yet relentlessly, a slow-burning karma for his choices. Meanwhile, Emily and Noah existed beyond the chaos, untouched by public judgment. For her, Adrian's downfall was irrelevant, it only confirmed what she had already realized: the man she loved had lost his humanity, and she had regained hers. Emily moved into a modest apartment overlooking a small, quiet street. It wasn't luxurious, but it was hers. Each corner felt like a blank canvas, a space where she could finally breathe without the shadow of betrayal looming over her. The rooms were simple: soft curtains, a small crib for Noah, a cozy couch, but every item carried intentionality and warmth, chosen with care for herself and her newborn. Grace visited often, her presence a reminder that even in the harshest circumstances, kindness could be found. Together, they shared meals, laughter, and quiet evenings where Emily would tell Noah stories of resilience and hope. Grace became more than a friend, she became a family anchor, someone who had seen the worst of life and survived, inspiring Emily to embrace her own strength. Every day, Emily marveled at Noah's tiny fingers and soft breaths, the way he smiled unknowingly at the simplest things. She bathed him, fed him, and sang lullabies, filling the apartment with love that no amount of wealth or luxury could replicate. The world outside remained chaotic, but inside her small home, Emily built a sanctuary defined not by money or status, but by safety, care, and unconditional love. With each passing day, the weight of Adrian's betrayal lifted slightly. She no longer dwelled on the floor he had reserved for Vanessa or the neglect she endured. Instead, she focused on building a life defined by courage, empathy, and freedom. Emily had chosen to rewrite her story, not as a victim, but as a mother, a survivor, and a woman who had reclaimed her life. She held Noah close, whispering softly, "This is our life now. Our beginning." And for the first time in months, she felt complete, unbroken, and ready for whatever came next. Months passed, and the world that once seemed to bend at Adrian Blake's every command began to crumble. The business empire he had carefully constructed started to falter under scrutiny and lost investments. Board members pulled out quietly, whispers of scandal following him like shadows wherever he went. The lavish life that had consumed his thoughts and time offered no comfort now. Vanessa, who had thrived on the attention and luxury he provided, eventually grew impatient. One evening, she left without warning, carrying only her designer bag and a few personal belongings, leaving Adrian alone in the penthouse suite that had once felt like a kingdom. The absence was deafening. He sat on the edge of the empty bed, the echoes of her laughter replaced by silence and the faint hum of the city below. He finally looked around at the life he had built, grand, empty, hollow. For the first time, he felt the crushing weight of his choices. The love he had taken for granted, the woman who had endured every betrayal, the child he had abandoned, none of it could be reclaimed. Alone, disgraced, and broken, Adrian realized that money, influence, and indulgence could never replace genuine affection. He had sacrificed the only people who had ever truly loved him, Emily and their son. And as the realization sank in, he understood, too late, that some losses could never be mended, no matter how much wealth he amassed. She shared a bed with a homeless stranger and found more kindness than in her own marriage. Every whispered word, every gentle handhold from Grace reminded her that compassion could exist even in the bleakest moments. From that narrow mattress came clarity, strength, and a courage she never knew she possessed. Holding baby Noah close, feeling his tiny heartbeat against her chest, Emily finally understood the power of resilience. Sometimes, life shatters you in the darkest places not to break you, but to forge unbreakable light. And in that light, she would rise, strong, whole, and free.